and for one dangerous second, it looked like he had walked in on something that could end a man's life. Sunlight cut through the slats, dust hanging in the air, and a young woman lay curled in the straw. Dress torn, skin marked, breath shallow like she might stop if no one noticed. Silas froze, because in this part of the Arizona territory, a man alone with a woman half his age in a barn didn't need to do wrong to be judged guilty. He moved without thinking, reaching to pull her away from splintered boards, and that was the moment any passerby could have sworn they saw the worst kind of sin. Her eyes snapped open, wide with fear, and she jerked away hard. "Don't." "It still hurts there." The words came out broken, sharp with pain, and Silas felt his gut drop because that hurt didn't sound new, and it didn't sound like a fall. He pulled his hand back fast, palms open, stepping away like a man backing off from a loaded revolver. "I ain't gonna touch you," he said low, "'cause sometimes the first promise mattered more than any help. If the story ended right there, folks would have whispered his name wrong by sundown. A 49-year-old rancher, locked in a barn, a young woman on the floor, and no one around to hear the truth. That was how men lost everything out here. Not always for what they did, but for what people thought they saw." He slid the barn door shut and dropped the wooden bar, not to trap her, but to keep the world out, and the sound echoed louder than he liked. She flinched at the noise, eyes darting to the door like she expected it to burst open. Silas stepped back again, all the way to the far wall, sitting on a feed crate so there'd be no doubt about distance. Only then did he really see her. Bruises layered over bruises, some old and yellowed, some dark and fresh, marking her arms and hip in places a fall wouldn't reach. Straw tangled in her hair, dust streaked across her cheek, and a thin cut where cloth had torn skin. Outside, cicadas screamed in the heat, and a horse stamped near the fence. Restless, Silas recognized her, and that made it worse. Clara Whitmore, the girl from the neighboring land, close enough he'd seen her walk past his fence a dozen times. Head down, never meeting his eye, he fetched water, set the tin cup within reach, then stepped away again. She drank like someone who hadn't known when the next chance would come. Near the door lay a pale scarf, torn clean like it had been ripped away in a hurry. She hadn't wandered in. She had run. What do you think she ran from? Fear, shame, or a man who promised he would not stop? His first thought was simple and wrong. He thought he could help her up, walk her home before dark, maybe speak to her husband, man to man, and settle it quiet. That was the lie good men told themselves in the West, that a calm word could fix what fists had broken. She shifted, winced, and pressed a hand to her side. "Please," she said, barely above a breath. "Don't take me back yet." The word "yet" hit him harder than a punch. Silas swallowed, because that one word meant this had happened before, and silence hadn't saved her. He nodded once, not trusting his voice. Outside the barn, dust stirred near the fence line. A faint clink of tack carried on the air, metal touching leather, then stopping. Silas stood and peered through a crack in the wood. Nothing clear, just heat and distance, but his shoulders tightened. Trouble didn't travel alone. He turned back to her, mind racing, weighing every choice, knowing each one had a price. "Before we go further, hear this straight. This story is drawn from old accounts and frontier memory, written again with care, with a few details shaped to bring out its lessons and weight. The images you see are created by AI to help you feel the dust and danger of another time, not to mislead. If this kind of story isn't for you, it's all right to step away now and take care of yourself. But if you're still here, stay close, because what follows matters." Silas kept his eyes on the crack in the wood and his ears on the dirt outside. He had seen men get judged in town, not by proof, but by the shape of a rumor. A stranger could ride in, tell a half story, and leave a good man ruined behind him. That was why he did not rush. That was why he did not touch her again. He backed away, slow, and let her see his hands. Then he noticed the small thing that told him this was not a simple stumble in the dark. Her scarf was torn clean, like someone had yanked it hard, and the tear was fresh, not frayed by weather. Silas knew cloth did not rip like that on a fence. It ripped like that in a grip. Outside, the horse sound came again. One step, then stillness, like a rider had stopped to listen. Silas felt the old fear that every rancher knows, the fear of being alone on your land when someone decides it is theirs. He looked at Clara, and he realized the danger was not only what Jed might do to her, it was what Jed could make people believe Silas had done. And if Jed wanted to bury a story, he would not bring the law first. He would bring witnesses, the wrong kind. If you were standing where Silas stood, would you open that door or keep it barred for one more minute? Silas spoke low, steady. "Who did this?" he asked. She hesitated, eyes dropping, and that hesitation told him enough. "Your husband," he said, not as an accusation, but a fact. She nodded once. "And he ain't just any man," Silas added, because he already knew the answer. "He's respected," she whispered. "He drinks with the law." That changed everything. Jed Whitmore wasn't just a husband. He was a man with friends, with a name folks recognized. A man who wore a smile in town and carried his temper home. A man who could walk into a saloon and have people listen. Silas felt the walls closing in. If he sent her back, she'd be hurt again. Maybe worse. If he hit her, he'd be branded a thief of another man's wife. A criminal before the law ever asked questions. Outside, the sound came again. A horse stopping, closer this time, right by the fence. Silas moved to the door, hand resting on the bar, listening. Whoever it was, they weren't passing through. They were looking. He glanced back at Clara, saw fear tighten her jaw, and understood the math of it all. Report it. And she'd be sent home to a man the town trusted. Hide her. And he'd stand alone against whispers, badges, and rope. The barn felt smaller now. The sun lower, the air thick. Silas Morgan had one choice to make, no good way out. Because if he opened that door, someone would suffer. And if he kept it closed, someone would come looking harder. Which sin would he carry? The one everyone could see, or the one that kept her alive? Silas didn't open the barn door right away. He stood there listening, hand resting on the wooden bar, counting the seconds between sounds, the way a man does when he knows trouble is nearby but doesn't yet know its shape. Outside, the horse shifted its weight, leather creaking soft, close enough that Silas could picture the animal's breath fogging the air near the fence. Then the sound drifted away. Not fast, not slow, just enough to say someone was thinking. Silas waited a full minute more before easing the bar back and cracking the door an inch. Nothing but heat and dust. Whoever had been there wasn't ready to be seen. That was worse. He closed the door again and turned back to Clara. She hadn't moved much, but her eyes followed him. Sharp now, like fear had burned the sleep out of her. "You can stay here tonight," Silas said. "Long as you need." She nodded, but her hand shook when she tried to pull the blanket higher. Silas set another lantern low, away from her, enough light to see without turning the place into a signal. He poured more water, tore a strip from an old clean shirt, and slid it across the floor to her. She took it, pressed it to her side, and winced hard enough that Silas looked away. There were things a man didn't need to see to understand. He sat back down on the feed crate, keeping space, staring at the dirt between his boots. The silence stretched. Finally, she spoke. "He'll come looking." Silas nodded. "I figured. He always does." That word always settled heavy. Silas cleared his throat. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded again. He handed her a piece of bread and some dried meat. Simple food, nothing fancy, the kind you ate to keep moving. She ate slow, careful, like every bite had to be earned. Silas watched the light shift through the slats, afternoon sliding toward evening, and felt the wrongness of it all settle into his bones. This wasn't his fight. That was the first lie. The second lie was that he could fix it clean. In his mind, he kept seeing Jed Whitmore the way most folks did. A man who paid his tab, a man who tipped his hat, a man who shook hands with deputies and laughed loud enough to sound friendly. Men like that didn't get crossed lightly. Have you ever known a man like that? The kind everyone likes in public? Silas thought about walking Clara home once the sun dropped. standing there while she went inside, saying a few words to Jed, calm words, man to man. He'd done it before with fence disputes and wandering cattle. It had worked then. But when he looked at Clara, curled on the straw, guarding her side like it was made of glass, he knew that idea was already dead. He stepped outside the barn for a moment, just long enough to scan the fence line, fresh marks in the dirt. Hoof prints that hadn't been there that morning. Someone had come close enough to see the barn, close enough to wait. Silas came back in and shut the door again. "Did he hit you today?" he asked. Not looking at her. She didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said finally. "And before today." She nodded. That was enough. Silas rubbed his face with both hands, feeling older than he had that morning. He thought about the deputy in town. Tom Rourke. A decent man, but careful. Careful men lived longer. Careful men also let things slide. Silas had seen it in Tombstone more than once. A man comes in with a bruise. A woman comes in with a quiet voice, and everyone looks away because it is easier. Then the next week, the same people talk about bad luck, like bad luck has hands and a temper. Silas did not want to be part of that. He also knew something else, something ranchers learn early. A bully is never just a bully. A bully is a test. He watches who flinches, who steps aside, who stays quiet. And once he learns the town will protect his smile, he takes more. Silas glanced at the barn door again, and he pictured Jed walking into a saloon, laughing with a deputy, and then walking home to do what he wanted behind closed walls. That thought made Silas feel sick, not from fear, but from shame. Not shame for Clara, shame that decent men had let it become normal. Tell me this in the comments. Do you think silence keeps peace, or do you think silence feeds cruelty? Without marks fresh enough, without a witness willing to stand in the open. Tom would shrug and say it was a family matter. Silas had seen it happen. He stood and fetched a bucket, some water, and cleaned what he could without touching her more than necessary. He talked while he worked about nothing important, about the heat, about a horse that had thrown a shoe last week, about how the grass near the river was greener this time of year. It wasn't kindness, it was cover, the sound of a normal world, spoken into a broken one. As the light faded, the barn took on that quiet sound barns get at night. Wood settling, animals breathing, time slowing. Silas felt the weight of it all pressed down. If Jed came back tonight, there'd be no talking. If Silas took Clara to town in the morning, folks would talk. If he did nothing, something worse would happen. Clara shifted again and bit back a sound. Silas stood, went to the far wall, and leaned there, arms crossed, keeping himself steady. "I'm not sending you back," he said at last, her eyes lifted, cautious hope flickering. "But I need you to listen," he added. "If he asks, if anyone asks, you came here hurt. That's all. No stories. No details." She nodded, quick and eager. Outside, a coyote howled, long and lonely. Silas checked the latch again, then sat back down. He wasn't sure when he'd crossed the line from neighbor to something else, but he knew he couldn't step back now. The night stretched on. No footsteps, no voices, just waiting. And waiting was its own kind of danger. If you're still with me, this might be a good moment to settle in. Pour yourself some tea or coffee, let it cool a little, and tell me in the comments what time it is, where you're listening from, and where you are. If stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing quiet-like so you don't miss the next one when it comes along. And here's something I want you to think about and tell me below. If you were in Silas's place right now, would you take Clara to town at first light, or would you keep her hidden one more day, knowing both choices carry a price? Your answer says more than you might think. Morning came slow and hot. Silas hadn't slept much, not really. He had sat on the feed crate through most of the night, listening to the barn breathe, listening for footsteps that never quite came. When the sky finally lightened, Clara was awake already. She looked smaller in the gray light, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like hay and leather. Eyes alert in a way no young person's eyes should have to be. Silas poured water, handed it to her, then stepped outside. The land looked the same as it always had. Fence posts straight, dust quiet, nothing broken. And that worried him more than if something had been torn apart. He saddled his horse slow, deliberate, not rushing, because men who rushed made mistakes. The plan was simple, or at least it sounded simple in his head. Take Clara to the edge of town, find someone who could look at her properly, then decide the rest. Claire stood when he came back in, steadying herself against a post. "You sure?" she asked. Silas nodded. "As I ever am." They moved careful, keeping to the low ground, avoiding the main road. It was early enough that most folks were still inside, coffee cooling, boots not yet on. They were almost to the turn that led toward Tombstone when a voice cut across the dirt. "Morning." Silas knew that voice. He stopped. Jed Whitmore stood by the fence, hat tipped just enough to look friendly, one hand resting on the rail like he'd been there a while. His horse was tied nearby, calm, like this was just another stop on a normal morning. Jed's eyes slid from Silas to Clara and then back again. "You left in a hurry last night," he said to her, tone light, almost joking. Clara stiffened. Silas stepped half a pace forward, not touching her, but close enough to block the line between them. "She's hurt," Silas said. "I'm taking her to town." Jed smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's so." He said, "Funny thing, that's my wife." Silas felt the heat rise in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Then you ought to be glad someone's helping her." Jed laughed once. "Short, helping," he repeated. "Looks to me like you're sticking your nose where it don't belong." Jed stepped closer. Too close. Silas could smell whiskey on his breath, old and sour. Jed shoved him, not hard, just enough to test. Silas stumbled back a step, then came forward again. Planted. The shove turned into a grab. Silas twisted, caught Jed's wrist, and the two men locked up for a moment. Boots grinding in the dirt, no punches, no wild swings. Just two men testing weight and balance, the way it happens when neither wants witnesses. "Enough," a voice called. Deputy Tom Rourke rode up slow, reins loose, badge catching the morning light. He took in the scene in one look. Two men squared up, a woman standing back, pale and quiet. Tom dismounted, calm as ever. "What's going on here?" he asked. Jed let go first, straightened his coat, smiled back in place. "Morning." "Tom," he said. "Just fetching my wife. She wandered off." Silas opened his mouth. Tom raised a hand, gentle but firm. "Let's all take a breath." He looked at Clara. "You all right, miss?" Clara hesitated, then nodded once. Tom's eyes flicked to Silas. "Anything you want to say?" Silas chose his words careful. "She's hurt," he said. "Needs seeing to." Tom studied Clara again, then Jed. "She your wife?" he asked Jed. Jed nodded. "Sure is," Tom sighed, almost too quiet to hear. "Well," he said, "that puts us in a tight spot." He looked at Silas. "You know how this goes. Without a complaint, without clear proof, my hands are tied. And if I overstep, Jed's friends will call it badge abuse." Silas felt something cold settle in his gut. Jed smiled wider. "See," he said, "all a misunderstanding." Tom turned to Clara. "You want to come back with him?" Clara looked at the ground. Silas watched her shoulders tighten. She shook her head. "Just barely." Jed's smile slipped. Tom noticed. "Miss," he said gently, "if there's something you need to say, now's the time." Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes flicked to Jed, then away. "I just need rest," she said. Tom nodded. Slow. "All right," he said. "I can't force anything right now, but I don't want trouble." He looked at Jed. "Get her home." He looked at Silas. "You stay out of it." That was that. Jed reached for Clara's arm. Silas moved without thinking. He grabbed Jed's sleeve and yanked him back. Jed swung. Silas ducked, shoulder catching Jed in the chest, sending him stumbling into the fence. Dust kicked up. Tom shouted, "Enough." Jed steadied himself, face red now, eyes hard. He pointed at Silas. "This ain't over," he said. "You hear me?" Silas said nothing. He watched as Jed took Clara by the arm and led her away. Not rough, not gentle, just firm enough to remind her who was in charge. Tom stayed behind a moment. He lowered his voice. I know you mean well, he said to Silas, but you're walking into something you won't like. Silas nodded. I know. Tom mounted up. Be careful, he said. Men like him don't forget. Silas stood there long after they were gone, dust settling, morning fully awake now. He felt the weight of it settle in his chest. He had tried the clean way. It had failed. And as he turned back toward his ranch, he noticed something he hadn't before. A set of fresh tracks. Different from Jed's horse. He knelt, ran his fingers through the dirt, and frowned. Someone else had been there. Someone who hadn't shown their face yet. And Silas understood then that this wasn't just about a man and his wife anymore. It was about something bigger, something moving in the background, waiting for the right moment to step forward. Silas didn't follow them. Not right away. He stood there in the road until the dust settled, until the sound of hooves faded and the morning felt wrong in a way he couldn't shake. Letting Clara go back with Jed felt like failure, but chasing after them would have made things worse, not better. That was the trouble with men like Jed Whitmore. They didn't need to win outright. They just needed you to make one bad move. Silas turned back toward his ranch, slower now, eyes on the ground, tracking the marks he had noticed earlier. Jed's horse prints were easy to spot. So were his, but the others were lighter. Different, the kind of tracks left by someone who didn't want to be noticed. Silas followed them along the fence line, past a low spot where the grass stayed greener, toward the back edge of his land. They stopped near the old shed he hadn't used in years. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken, which meant whoever had been there knew exactly what they were looking for. Silas crouched in the dirt and held up a pinch of it to the light. It was fine and dry, but there was a darker smear under it, like a shoe had ground ash into the soil. That kind of ash did not come from a campfire, it came from a forge. Silas thought of Charleston, and the blacksmith work that passed through there, and the quiet men who paid in cash and asked no questions. Then he remembered something an old drover once told him. When cattle go missing, the theft is not the hard part. The hard part is the new mark, and the man who owns the mark owns the story. Silas stood, dusting his hands, and he understood that Jed was not acting alone. Someone smarter was using him. Someone who did not shout in the street. Someone who waited. And Silas knew this much. When he finally rode toward Tombstone before dawn, he would not worry about Jed first. He would worry about the man Jed answered to. That thought sat heavy. Silas spent the rest of the morning fixing small things that didn't need fixing. A loose board, a gate hinge. Busy work to keep his hands steady, but his mind stayed on Clara. On the way, she had looked at the ground instead of at Tom. On the way, Jed's grip hadn't left a mark because it didn't need to. By early afternoon, the heat settled in thick. Silas poured himself water and sat on the porch, hat tipped low. That was when he saw her. Clara came walking up the dirt path, alone, no horse, no hat. Just slow, careful steps, like each one cost something. Silas stood so fast the chair tipped back. She stopped when she saw him, eyes wide, breath quick. I told him I was going to the river, she said, to cool off. He was still sleeping it off, and she didn't waste the minute. Silas didn't ask how long that excuse would hold. He opened the door and waved her in. Inside the house was dim and cool, smelling of wood and coffee. She sank into a chair, like her legs had finally given out. Silas set water in front of her, then sat across, hands folded. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara reached into the pocket of her skirt and pulled out a small cloth bundle. She set it on the table between them. I took this when I ran, she said. I didn't know what it was. I just knew he didn't want me to touch it. Silas didn't open it yet. He looked at her instead. You shouldn't be here, he said. If he finds out, I know, she said. But you need to see this. Silas unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small piece of iron, heavy for its size, worn smooth from use. A cattle stamp, not his. He felt his jaw tighten. He meets a man out by Charleston, Claire said. Name's Pike. He wears a ring on his right hand, flat and square. I heard them talking about changing marks, about pushing blame. Silas leaned back. Breath slow. Pike. He'd heard the name before. Everyone had. Not a man you saw often, a man who stayed just outside trouble, letting others step into it first, and my name came up. Silas said. Clara nodded. He said you had clean land, clean records, that people would believe it if something went wrong. Silas closed his eyes for a moment. This wasn't just about Jed anymore. This was about losing everything. Land, name, freedom. He opened his eyes and looked at Clara. You understand what this means? He asked. She nodded. If you turn this in, he'll say I stole it, or that you did. If you don't, he'll come back for it. Silas stared at the stamp. Either way. Trouble was already walking toward him. He wrapped the iron back up and slid it into a drawer. You stay here tonight, he said. We'll think. Clara hesitated. He won't stop, she said. Silas met her gaze. I know. Outside, the afternoon dragged on, quiet and heavy. They spoke little. Silas cooked simple food. Clara ate just enough. When the sun dipped low, Silas walked the fence again. More tracks, fresh, closer this time. He returned to the house, locked the door, and checked at the windows. Claire sat at the table, hands folded tight. He's looking, she said. Yes, Silas answered. But so is someone else. She frowned. The man named Pike. He said, he won't let Jed ruin a good plan. That seemed to scare her more than Jed ever had. Silas felt it too. Jed was predictable. Pike was not. As night fell, Silas knew one thing clear as day. By morning, either the law would be involved or someone would come knocking in the dark. And whichever happened first would decide how this ended. Silas didn't wait for morning to think itself through. When trouble started circling like this, you either stepped into the light on your own terms or you got dragged there by someone else. Before dawn, he saddled his horse and packed light, food, water, the iron stamp wrapped tight and hidden where no one would think to look. Clara stood on the porch, pale in the low light, hair pulled back, jaw set. You don't have to come. Silas said. She shook her head. If I stay, he'll come. If I go, at least it's in daylight. That was the truth of it. They rode toward Tombstone as the sun came up, keeping a steady pace, not rushing, not hiding either. By the time the boardwalks came into view, the town was waking. Boots on wood, doors opening, the smell of coffee and dust. Silas felt eyes on him, more than usual. Word moved fast in small places. They tied up near the edge of town. Silas told Clara to wait by the general store while he checked the sheriff's office. She nodded, but her eyes kept tracking the street. Inside the office, the air was stale and quiet. Deputy Tom Rourke looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. I figured I'd see you again, Tom said. Silas laid it out plain, not every detail. Just enough. A hurt woman, a husband with friends, a mark that didn't belong. Tom listened, arms crossed, jaw tight. When Silas finally placed the wrapped iron on the desk and opened it, Tom exhaled slow. That's not yours, he said. No, Silas answered, and it won't be the only one. Tom rubbed his temple. You know what this means, he said. If this is real, it's bigger than your neighbor. I know, Silas said. That's why I'm here. Tom stood. I need time, he said, and I need her willing to speak. Silas nodded. Outside, a voice rose, loud, angry. Silas knew it before he saw it. Jed Whitmore stood in the middle of the street, hat off, sleeves rolled, telling his version to anyone who'd listen. She ran off. Jed said, this man took her in. You all know me. You know I wouldn't hurt my own wife. A few heads nodded. Others stayed quiet. Pike wasn't there. Not yet, but his work was. Silas stepped out onto the boardwalk. Jed saw him and smiled, wide and sharp. There he is. Jed called. Ask him what he's been doing with my wife. The street slowed. People turned. This was how things turned ugly. Not all at once, just enough at a time. Silas walked forward, calm. I helped someone who was hurt, he said. That's all? Jed laughed. Funny, he said. She didn't look hurt when I saw her this morning. That was a lot. Clara stepped out of the store before Silas could stop her. She stood there, small against the noise, hands shaking but eyes clear. That's not true, she said. The street went quiet. Jed's smile faltered. You ought to come home, he said, softer now. You're tired, she shook her head. He said he'd put me in the ground by the river. She said, no shouting, no tears, just the words. They landed hard. Tom stepped out of the office then. That's enough, he said. Jed's face changed. This is my wife, he snapped. You got no right. Tom met his gaze. I've got a right to stop a killing. Pike chose that moment to make himself known. He didn't step into the open. He sent 2 men instead. They moved fast, shoulder to shoulder, one toward Silas, one toward Clara. It happened quick. A shove, a fist. Silas took a hit to the jaw, staggered, then drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him back into a post. Wood cracked. Someone yelled. The other man grabbed Clara's arm. She screamed once. Silas saw red. He crossed the distance and yanked the man back, twisted his arm until he let go. Tom drew his revolver and fired into the air. The crack echoed down the street. Everyone freeze, he shouted. The men backed off. Jed stood breathing hard. Across the street, a man with a flat, square ring on his right hand watched from the shade, eyes unreadable. Clara saw it. Her breath caught. That's him, she said. Pike. Pike tipped his hat, slow, and disappeared into the crowd. If you were Tom, would you chase Pike right then, or lock Jed first and build the case? Tom cursed under his breath. Silas wiped blood from his mouth. This had gone past talk, past quiet. Tom stepped closer to Silas. You just made this public, he said. There's no going back now. Silas nodded. I know. He looked at Clara. Standing straighter than she had the day before. She wasn't safe yet. Not even close, because Pike hadn't acted. He'd only watched. And men like that didn't watch unless they were deciding how hard to strike next. The night after Tombstone felt longer than any night Silas could remember. The ranch lay quiet under the stars, the kind of quiet that usually meant peace. But tonight it felt like the world was holding its breath. Claire sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, eyes fixed on the dark line of the horizon. Silas stood a few feet away, not crowding her, just there, like a fence post that did not move when the wind came. They both knew Pike would not forget what happened in town. Men like Pike never did, but dawn came anyway, soft, unstoppable, and with it came Deputy Tom, riding hard, dust on his coat, eyes tired but steady. They did not need many words. Jed had been taken in before sunrise. Pike had tried to run. Tom had picked up a ledger name in Charleston before daylight. The stamp and the names tied together had been enough this time. Not because the law suddenly grew brave, but because too many people had seen too much to pretend otherwise. Clara listened as Tom explained, hands clasped tight. When it was done, she did not cry. She just let out a long breath, like someone who'd been holding it for years. Silas watched her and felt something settle in his chest. Relief, yes, but also something heavier, because he knew this was not the end of her road. It was the start of a harder one. She stayed on the ranch that morning, not hidden, not as a favor, but as a choice. She helped with small things. Water, sweeping, feeding the horses. Nothing dramatic, just honest work under a wide sky, and that mattered more than words ever could. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land gold, Silas leaned on the fence and looked out over the grass. I want to pause the story right here for a moment, not to break it, but to step into it with you. I have told many stories like this over the years, different names, different places, but the same quiet question always sits at the center. When doing the right thing costs you something, do you still do it? Silas did not act because he was brave. He acted because he could not live with himself if he did nothing. And I think that is something many of us understand, especially as we get older. We learn that courage does not feel loud. It feels heavy. It feels lonely. It feels like standing still when everything inside you wants to turn away. Watching Clara that evening, Silas did not see a woman he had saved. He saw a person who had finally been given space to stand up straight, and that is another lesson worth keeping. Helping someone is not about fixing their life. It is about giving them room to choose their own. Later, Claire stood beside him at the fence. She did not lean on him. She stood on her own feet. "I don't know what comes next," she said. Silas nodded. Most good things start that way. They shared a quiet smile. No promises, no rush. Just the understanding that safety and respect were the soil where anything real had to grow. In the days that followed, word spread. Not all of it kind. Some folks said Silas had gone too far. Others said he had not gone far enough. That is always how it is. But the land stayed, the horses stayed, and Silas slept better than he had in years, because he had chosen a side he could live with. I often think about that when I look back on my own life, about the times I stayed quiet to keep the peace, and the times I spoke up even when my voice shook. If there is one thing age teaches you, it is this. Regret is heavier than fear. Fear fades. Regret lingers. Silas did not win anything that night in Tombstone. He did not gain land or money or praise. What he gained was simpler. He kept his name. He kept his sleep. He kept his sense of who he was. And Clara gained something just as important. The chance to rebuild without being broken again. That is why this story matters. Not because it is about the Old West, but because it is about choices that still face us now. When someone near you is hurting, do you look away because it is easier? Or do you step closer, knowing it might cost you comfort? When the crowd leans one way, do you lean with it? Or do you stand still and let the noise pass around you? Those are not questions with easy answers, but they are questions worth asking. As the sun set on the ranch, Silas poured 2 cups of coffee. They sat on the porch, quiet, watching the day end. No big speeches, no final victory, just the slow understanding that a good life is built one hard choice at a time. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, I would ask you to let me know. Tap the like button if you felt something here, because it helps this channel reach others who might need these stories too. And if you want to keep walking these old roads with me, consider subscribing. I tell these stories for people who believe that character still matters. Before you go, I want to leave you with one last question, and I hope you answer it in the comments. Have you ever done the right thing knowing it would make your life harder? And if so, would you make the same choice again today? Tell me where you are listening from, what time it is there, and what this story brought up for you. Until next time, take care of yourself.